Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. This will be part one of 3 reports covering a recent event I attended locally called HeroCon. HeroCon is run by the Australian Defence Wargaming Association, nominally annually, although obviously over the last couple of years it hasn't run, and it's run in support of the charity Soldier On. HeroCon is usually a 2-day event, but with NovaCore having been so recent, there wasn't really an appetite among Infinity players for a 2-day event, so we ran it as a small 1-day local event. We had a dozen players over the course of the day, including one person who came down from Sydney, and after putting a community poll up, I played Hassassin Bahram. Round 1 would be Unmasking, and rounds 2 and 3 would be Acquisition and a lightly modified version of Mind Wipe, respectively. Hassassin Bahram felt like a reasonably good choice for this, and the community apparently agreed. Here are the lists that I played. This on screen now is the first of 2 lists, but it's the one that I would play all 3 rounds. This is built to take advantage of what I consider to be one of Hassassin Bahram's strengths, which is that it is slightly better at playing the info war game than Vanilla Hack Islam. Vanilla Hack Islam actually runs a very lean, efficient info war game. I really like it as a hacking faction at a discount. But in Hassassin Bahram, you have access to the same really good pieces. You have access to Hassassin Barids. But the difference is that in the Bahram, they are linkable, which means those fantastic, cheap Ballistic Skill 12 pitches can be linked for Burst 2. And in addition, there's a new piece in this list, Pandora, which I think she's niche, but she's useful, and she's useful in particular in the context of what this list is trying to do. So, for context, this is intentionally an InfoWar Hassassin Bahram list. Locally, in my local community, there is an increasing awareness that offensive info war to establish dominance over other info war lists is a really powerful strategy. To everyone who watched the NovaCore videos that I put out, this won't be an unfamiliar concept. I had developed the concept for counter-nomad operations relatively some time ago, and I put it into practice in a really big way in NovaCore. I had multiple games where, in fact, I don't think there was a single game at NovaCore where an enemy hacker survived to have a turn. And although I am sort of the biggest proponent of that locally, other people have certainly cottoned on. There is a strong awareness that if you are bringing an info war list and your opponent is bringing an info war list, you don't spend the first turn making missile strikes. You spend the first turn killing every enemy hacker. This list is specifically designed to, 1, succeed in that environment, and 2, survive in that environment. So, when we look at the hackers we have in this list, 2 Barids and Pandora, what do we see? Firstly, the Barids are killer hackers, and they are killer hackers with Trinity -3, which makes them, for their cost, some of the hardest hackers to engage in the game. They are only 15 points. Each of them will have a doctor nearby in my usual list link compositions. And even if you drop a picture on their head and engage them with something like Jazz, Jazz is going to be rolling 3 dice on 14s, and they'll be rolling 1 dice on 14s. Now, Jazz has the burst advantage, and obviously she has BTS and the firewall effective BTS bonus from having placed a picture, but that is still not a perfect face-to-face roll. She doesn't just guaranteed get to make that kill, and there's a risk that she will take damage. The third hacker, being Pandora, fits into this as well. Pandora in this list is my only actual hacker. She's the only hacker I have that can spotlight, Oblivion, etc. But she is also really hard to kill. Because she has no wound in cap and 0 pain, again, for her reasonable 24-point cost, she's a very hard hacker to offensively KHD. She's not like a BTS 9 Interventor, but under some circumstances, including being caught by an opposing pitcher with a high damage Trinity, she might actually be tougher. In addition, she adds a 3rd BS12 pitcher to the list. Now, this is not always necessary, but in the 3 practice games I had before events, in one of them, it mattered hugely. In 2 games, she was just basically a more expensive Ghulam hacker. Okay, whatever, that's fine. But in the 3rd game, all of those effects, her survivability and her effective 3rd model with a pitcher, the 5th and 6th pitcher shots going into the list, mattered massively, as did her incidental survivability. In that game, on the 3rd turn, my opponent drop trooped a shotgun in, And it turns out Pandora is one of the hardest models to kill with shotguns. She sits there dodging at a -6, and she sits there dodging on 12, imposing a -6 to direct hit mode, which turns the shotgun from a really effective fork, usually it's shooting direct versus dodges, into kind of a very anemic weapon. So that's super interesting. The rest of the list is what I would call, modern 2022 good stuff. There are 2 Hassassin Fides, there is McMurra, there are 2 Assawiras, there's a guided missile remote, because why not? And there are enough Ghulams to fill out some links. In order to afford Pandora, I've cut what might otherwise be, for example, a second Assawira AP Spitfire, and replaced it with Yara Haddad. I kind of like that. She is much cheaper, and she adds another type of firepower to the list. She fights in all of the same range bands, and she's actually got more versatile range bands than Assawira Spitfire. She's obviously much less tough, but she has an MSV2. And just having access to smoke shooting, MSV2, etc. on a much, much cheaper platform, I think is a reasonable trade. I'm also cutting chain of command, and so you will see during the course of the game, I'm very conservative with my Assawira Lieutenant. It is taking just that as a risk. It's something I'm aware of. It is a hard lieutenant to hack, but it's not impossible. It's a hard lieutenant to kill, but it's not impossible. Assawira is one of the toughest models for its cost in the game, thanks to regeneration, high stats, etc. But I did voluntarily run the risk of loss of lieutenant with this list. Another interesting thing to note is that I am renewing my love affair with Ghazi Matawiya. Traditionally, or particularly over the course of N4, when Matawiya received their nerf and Dalami received their massive buff, beginning of N4 we had 6-point Dalami with camouflage and Panzerfaust and shotguns, and we had pretty heavily nerfed Mutts. We just saw an immediate transition in Haq Islam and Hassassins from Matawiya that were popular in N4 to Dalami in N. Mutts that were popular in N3 to Dalami in N4. But with Dalami coming back up to a fairly reasonable 8 points, and Matawiya actually not being that bad. It turns out that a 6-point chain rifle Whip 16 jammer is still a really good profile. I am rediscovering Matawiya, and for this scenario set, with 2 16-inch deployment zones, the modified mind map version had that, and of course Acquisition has that in round 2, and 1 exclusion zone in Unmasking, the benefit of Dalami was a little lower, and the benefit of Matawiya was higher. So I've relied wholly on Matawiya in this list, and I'm really glad that I did. They did really, really well. For visibility, my usual link setups will be something like Yara Haddad with a Ghulam NCO and a Barid, and then an Assawira Doctor backing that up since she's most likely to need it. And then the second link will usually be the Assawira with AP Spitfire, backed up by a Ghulam Doctor and a Hassassin Barid. But you can do some other things as well. You can build 4-man links with 2 Barids if you think you're going to go second and need 6 cents. It's very flexible. You just need 1 Ghulam in each of the 2 links. Now, this list should, intelligently, this list should be paired with a list that is built to do many of the same things, but which doesn't need to fear the opposing killer hackers. So basically a list for Ariadna and Tohar and factions that you just don't really expect to be doing big hacking games to you. Maybe Bakunin, for example. Probably Bakunin do have some KHDs, but it's not like vanilla Nomads or even Corregidor. However, I didn't really think about that before the event, and instead I took a meme list that I never played, which is a shame. I would like to play it at some point, but for visibility, here it is. So this is a list built with a very stripped down combat group 1. It runs 2 3-person links, although it can consolidate into a 5-person link, with basically, rather than McMurra, it gets by on a single Assault Matawiya. There is just 1 Fidei, the cheapest profile, but what you get by cutting all of those things is a Neurocinetic Sunduk Butt, 2 Hassassin Nadirs, and 2 Dalami. So basically the idea with this second combat group is that you clown car those nadir underneath one of the other camouflage markers. Just for interest, what the interaction is there is that you can hidden deploy a nadir, and once it is hidden deployed, it is no longer considered to be on the table, and so you can then deploy a camouflage marker in its place. The FAQ actually anticipates this and covers it. It tells you how to resolve that. When the nadir reveals, if the other thing is still there, you just move it the minimum distance to not be in close combat. Which means that, for example, you could put 2 Hassassin nadirs underneath the Sundukbut, which means that if your opponent goes to discover shoot the Sundukbut, they are facing burst 6 in ARO, which is pretty scary. Like, it's one fantastic, great big explosion, but it was never really going to be suitable in any of the games that I was playing. There is basically one person at the event that I would have played this into. Like, I would have 100% played this into them because they play aggressive, high risk, high reward. And this, I think, would probably just win the game in reactive on the spot. But I never played them, so I never used it. This should be a more rounded, less hacking oriented, 2 buried hackers and a missile bot. I don't need to worry about KHD's list. It wasn't. Hey, that's fine. So, Game 1 was Unmasking, and it was against the shock army of Acontecimento. Trent from Sydney coming down. It was fantastic to see him again. I like this as an Acontecimento list. It fits a lot of things that make it quite playable in Unmasking, and it also does a few things I think are clever. So there is notable point of vulnerability, though. There is only one viable lieutenant. Now, nevertheless, it's a pretty good anti-Hassassin Bahram list. There are 2 regular mine layers along a paramedic, a sensor, and lieutenant, 5-person link. Very lean, very solid, very defensive. A Dragao, the cheapest Scylla profile, just relying on her pitcher to spread hacking. An Evo Mulebot. Trent likes this for firewalling the Dragao. I think that's fair enough. You could really take something else here. It would matter this game, but it wouldn't be determinative. And then a second combat group of Dart, a Naga, a Machinist, a Palbot, 2 Fugazi, and a Clipper. Now, this list is very interesting for a few reasons. Firstly, it is intentionally 14 troops. I actually like that. I think too few players build good 14 trooper lists, and 14 trooper lists have a very specific advantage in N4 in that they are meta subverters. There is a incredibly strong you take 15 troops meta. More bodies, more better. Very, very few lists don't play 15 troops. And so in that environment, if you play a 14 troop list in a faction that has access to some kind of drop or hidden deployment troop, to be fair, then your opponent will spend much of the game going, okay, does he have something that I haven't seen? Where's the hidden thing? Where's the Akal Commando? Because there is such a meta of 15 troops. If you just present with 14, and you built a good 14 trooper list, then you have this, the fog of war for your opponent is more complex than it would be if they could eliminate the possibility. If I saw 15 orders on the first turn out of Trent's list, excluding the Tackaware, I would know, cool, there is no Akal Commando coming. But I never did, so I could never fully discount that possibility. I like the group split here as well. Dart and the Naga, 6 orders is about enough for them to spend with the Machinist and Palbot as backup. And then you've got kind of like your other hacking presence in Combat Group 1 with Scylla. You could easily spend 8 orders on Scylla, or with the Dragao going Bird. Realistically, the Dragao and Scylla are the 2 active pieces in this first combat group, so if you lose both of them, you're kind of trying to be active with a static link. But nevertheless, I like this as a list, and in particular, the presence of models under camouflage and 2 regular mine layers really helps protect against Hassassin for days. In this scenario, Trent crit his lieutenant role, and he chose to go first. Very reasonable against Hassassin Bahram, especially in Unmasking, where there is really no advantage to going second. This is the table. So this is not a local table. This is one of the ADF Wargaming Association tables that they had brought down and set up for us, which was awesome. We played with interiors on this building, on this table, but just for mutual sanity. No, actually, yeah, we played with fully playable interiors. I would usually play something like the first accessible level is playable, only because it really become a nightmare if you have troops sitting inside multiple levels of a disassemblable building. But it was fine in this case. We made it work. Trent has picked to go first, so he's on this deployment zone here. For my part, I do a couple of things. So the first thing is I identify this as a list in which I have to be scared of his info war. Now, I don't know if Trent will make an info war attack on the first turn. He's a Pan-Oceanian player. It's not super their style, but his list could do it. He could run up with Scylla and just drop a whole lot of pitches and be a huge pain in the ass. And so I have certain deployment setups made that are like, I've configured my deployment to make that as difficult for him as possible. So risk number 1, Asawira just gets oblivioned. It is as far back as possible. Now, Scylla could definitely come all the way up here, and all the way here, and all the way here. to land a pitcher there, but it's frankly possible that she would have to come into jammer range of the Ghazi to make that attempt, and she'd be way out in the open. I am as far back as I can with the Asawira while still being safe, mitigating the risk of an Oblivion on him first turn. Similarly, in this building, we've got the Yara Haddad link. So Bereed Hacker here, again, well back in the deployment zone, well behind, it's like 6 inches forward. Second Bereed Hacker over here, well back in the deployment zone. Pandora herself would deploy, where would she deploy? I think here in this building. So Pandora's probably the most at risk, but she's also the toughest hacker, and there is a doctor nearby. Again, if my opponent wastes lots of time making that fight, I'm probably getting ahead. I have 2 Ghazi Matawi with jammers. One is deployed there, one is deployed there. To make assaults on these buildings really difficult. You would have to walk through jammer range to get to them. They're doing really stellar work in those placements. The missile bot's just hanging out in a building back here. McMurray will eventually deploy here. I actually deploy both of my Fidays in my first step. And I fail one, but I succeed the other. And I'll show you where it goes. So this is what I meant, this bifurcated building. There's this wall here, so that's the mule bunk there. But what we have here is Trent's only lieutenant candidate and Scylla. It takes me 2 rolls to get a Hassassin Fiday here, so one of them fails the roll. But what I'm doing is, because this Acontecimento regular is in a corner, I've got the Fiday position, so it just pinches the regular off. The regular can't get out here. I don't know why I'm prone. I actually should be standing because the regular could feasibly jump, but that would be very bad. Also, I'm positioned so that if either I can see Scylla, and I could also basically just see everything. Like, this is my line of fire out of this doorway. If Scylla or the regular, or frankly anything else, activate, and I choose to respond with the Fiday, I can place a shotgun template like that with the blast focus there. This will hit the regular and Scylla. And if only one of them is activating, and they can't be linked, to my knowledge, then both of them will take a hit, and one of them is not active, so it doesn't get a dodge. This turns out to be really solid, and is going to matter massively on the first turn. So just some quick deployment zone shots. Yep, here you can see this is my Pandora proxy. We've got this this link here. There's another Gulam back there. There's the Matalia. You can also see in this shot my Matalia with boarding shotgun. She's nooked down here. That's very careful. She can prone there. She can really only see this space, which is probably outside shotgun, but is inside Emarat range. And on the other side of the table here, this is where I've put down the Fiday that failed its infiltration roll, its impersonation roll. That's Aldrabel's model, but it's just a Fiday. And then we have this team here. So you can actually see, like, here is the table corner. This Asawira is well back. If I had a Farzan chain of command, I could probably be more aggressive with it. I don't. It kind of worked out. I've also gone with the Unmasking party, the three HVTs all together. I don't actually think this is always the best play, even if you're going second. In fact, it's often not. And my opponent had a guided missile launcher. If he had revealed all 3 of those on the first turn, and then had just dropped 1 missile on them, I would have been really behind on scenario, really early. Now, it would be very difficult for him to do that. He would accomplish almost nothing. Scylla herself couldn't really get clear in time. Both of his hackers as well, to note, and the Clipper were all in the same combat group. So it wasn't a huge risk, although I didn't actually necessarily gronk that when I was deploying. But I chose to do this mostly because one Matawiya here could really knock this off. And this space was actually just exactly deep enough for me to fit 3 HVTs. The deployment zone line starts something like there. So again, I've seen 14 troops from Trent. I can't discount the possibility of a commando, but by putting all 3 of the HVTs on that line there, there is physically not space for an Akal commando to at least walk in. It would have to combat jump. So, didn't matter. There was no Akal commando, but just something that I chose to do. Here's a quick shot of McMurray in reserve. He's reserving here just with the intention of, now that I know the coast is clear, he's hoping to impetuous this direction and lay smoke for the Matalia, which he will do later on. Okay, so Trent is going first. I actually choose to strip 1 order from each of his combat groups, which leaves him with 5 and 8 respectively, and he puts that to reasonable use. By far the most work is done here by the Naga hacker, which will move up to here, press this button, over to here, press this button, and then back into the building, which is great, right? That's what you want to do first turn of Unmasking. It reveals itself to be not a killer hacker, but a regular hacker. Okay, cool, that's useful information. It means he's only KHD as Scylla. And he reveals actually 2 decoy HVTs. Now, when I position them this closely like this, I actually just roll a dice randomly to pick which one is real, because it's way too easy to get into your own head of like, what is the most obvious, what is the least obvious, what is the blah, 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 blah. And you get into that recursive paper, scissors, rock environment. In this particular case, and actually sometimes even when I have like 3 equally good deployments across the map, I sometimes just I just secretly roll a d6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I let that guide me, because I can be a little predictable otherwise. Like, if you try and think too much about it, it can sometimes be quite easy for your opponent to pick the real one early. So I just randomized it, and it paid off really big time. And actually, it made the so there's man bun, blue hair, and generic guy, and it made generic guy the real target. Okay, cool. Trent picked the other 2, I think on the basis that they were the most defended, but realistically all 3 of them were as defended. One of them just didn't have cover. It wouldn't matter, none of them were ever killed, and that's mostly because of how much his first combat group ran into trouble. So this Fidei trap that I set back here paid off pretty big. He broke the link so that he could spend the lieutenant order on the regular because he knew the game was up. Discovered, succeeded, that was good. Activated again, discovered, and then the shotgun started flying. So it took a few orders to actually resolve this mess, but at the end of it, my Fidei was unconscious, but so was Scylla and his Acontecimento regular lieutenant. Now, that's massive. Not only have I scored 2 kills in reactive and only lost 1 troop, but I know he's in loss of lieutenant next turn. I can play accordingly. I have a huge amount of tactical flexibility now, and although he's gotten kind of up on scenario, he's only going to have 1 more turn to actually do the things that he needs to. On top of that, it's going to cost him 1 command token to reform a link, which means that he's down to 3, which means that the loss of lieutenant will be a little bit trickier, and he has to reserve some command tokens for repairing the Dragao and for repossessing the Dragao if I take it over. He does reform the link. He moves the paramedic up to try and recover Scylla and the Acontecimento regular, but, and this is pretty unlucky, both of them fail. So, I get to begin my turn in a reasonably good spot. My opponent is up on scenario with 1, 2 buttons pressed, but I have pretty much free reign. There are a few impetuous orders. This Ghazi just moves into this corner. McMurray, as planned, leaves this point, drops some smoke down. There is a Dragao in suppressive there. Drops smoke down to let this Matalia through. Matalia moves up, and then basically the first thing of the game is I get a little more smoke out of McMurray to get a second smoke template there. So we've got 2 smoke templates, and the Matalia uses the group 2 orders to make an assault on the Dragao. The Dragao elects to suppressive fire. I elect to Emarat the Dragao, and the Matalia explodes because it hit a Dragao in suppressive fire. But very, very unfortunately, the Dragao makes both saves. Now that's actually quite unlikely. It's got about 1 in 4 chance I think it's a less than 1 in 4 chance of surviving that. It needs to roll 2 11 pluses. Okay, yeah, no, so it's a 25% chance of surviving. Hey, you know what? That happens occasionally. That happens about 1 in 4 times. So the Matalia kind of dies for nothing, but it was very worth doing. If I had bricked that Dragao, I would have killed it that turn immediately and for free. McMurray would have just gone into it and belted it until it was dead. Didn't have that as an option. That's a shame. We press on. Most of the rest of the work this turn will be done somewhat conservatively by this link back here, who used the NCO order to basically just move up kind of to this position here. And that's about as much as I can do. We get some smoke down. There's smoke in front of the Dragao. So we're going to do some killer hacking. And we get pitches down. There are a few pitches actually. Pandora, I think, might even lay some herself when she moves out this direction. But we end up using this turn to establish a pitcher network, kind of like there, there, and there. We use one of those sets of pitches to absolutely annihilate the Naga, but it is a Naga, it is dogged, and it has a hacking device, which means that I have to kill it all the way to dead. So it takes 1 Trinity to put it into dogged, 1 Trinity to kill it. That's one of the nice things about Nagas, even though they are BTS 0. Trinity doesn't do shock ammunition or anything like that, it's just normal ammo. So the Naga takes, like, I think 2 orders more than I'd like to kill. But we do end up with the Link team staged sort of very nicely in this position here, and the Dragao inside repeater area. Now, I spend a couple of orders with Pandora as she moves forward and up into this nook here. I spend a couple of orders on Pandora trying to possess and then Oblivion the Dragao, but I don't succeed. The firewall, in this case from the Evo hacker, makes the difference. I'm not able to get through an active turn, despite, I think, 3 or 4 attempts. It happens, that's fine, that is why you pay for a 15-point Mulebot. So here we can see the game state at the beginning of Trent's turn. We've got 2 revealed HVTs still, he controls 2 buttons still, I have controlled none. So I'm behind on scenario, but he has a turn in loss of Lieutenant, and we've got my pitcher here and 2 pitchers here. So the Dragao is trapped inside pitcher area, and the Naga over here is dead. He's also in loss of Lieutenant, so this team is relatively safe, although if the Drago chose to close assault them, it would be a pretty nasty assault for it. It would be closing in on things that are much better at fighting in close range than it, and the Asawir in particular is a risk of just dodging into melee. What happens, though, is that on its tactical awareness order, the Dragao just bites the bullet, says, I'm firewalled, it'll be fine, flamethrowers and destroys both of these repeaters, and finally gets possessed. So, it's possessed in Trent's turn, which means I will have a whole turn with it if I so decide. So he has to spend his few remaining command tokens moving the Clipper, and the Clipper moves around, successfully dodges, and dodges into close combat, just to pin the Dragao down so I don't get to hose down his deployment zone. Possessed profiles are weaker than regular profiles, it's only Ballistic Skill 12, but it is still Burst 5 with a Flamethrower. This is about all that Trent gets to do in his second turn. There's some repositioning and some shuffling, but that's really it. And so I step on the gas. I go, it's my second turn now, and this is going to be really, really rough. So the orders, again, pretty much get spent on this team here. But what happens is that the Link team moves in this direction, traveling here and up to here, pressing buttons as they go. And McMurrough moves up here, killing a HVT that gets revealed, and then moving into close combat with the Clipper, burst 2 because the Dragao is in CC, easily kills the Clipper, and importantly, is now in close combat with the Dragao. He's also prone behind a railing so that basically nothing can shoot him. So if that Dragao gets repossessed next turn, it is in CC with my most dangerous CC troop. I also kill a HVT back here on the way through, which turns out to be the real one. It was being covered by the sniper, but there is smoke there now. Takes a couple of orders for the smoke LGL to land those, but I do get smoke down in this corridor. There's a HVT there. Asawira puts it out of its misery in close combat. So there's only one HVT left back here, and it's a decoy, so I am well up. Trent is also badly running out of specialists because the Dragao is possessed, his hackers are dead, the paramedic is in a lot of danger. What does happen is that Dart reveals as Yara Haddad is moving up through here. So I'm moving up Haddad up through smoke with the intention of smoke shooting the sniper. And Dart reveals basically to try and stop me. He's got MSV, takes a shot, I shoot back, I eliminate Dart, then I eliminate the sniper. So Trent is way, way down at this point. He has a crack in his third turn, but the problem is that really his big active piece is the Dragao, and there's nothing that he can do with it. A Palbot moves up and around to attempt, he repossesses it, tries to fight his way out of close combat, McMurrough kills it, the Palbot repairs it, tries to fight his way out of close combat, McMurrough kills it, there's no escaping. There's no way out for him. The Dragao dies, I think, twice over the course of the turn, and that's it. And at that point, I'm very comfortably able to pick up the last button, kill the last HVT, and this is actually the turn in which the Asawira Lieutenant finally moves out, takes advantage of its BTS-9 to kill the Flash Pulse bots at relatively low risk, and then kill the HVT. So this ends up being a 10-zip sweep. My classified was Net Undermine, which McMurrough randomly did at some point during the game. Oh no, there's no classified in Unmasking, but I would have Net Undermine in 2 future games. That's what I was thinking. So this was basically, things went pretty much as well as they could have gone. I would have liked to have passed 2 for-day infiltration rolls, but the one that landed hugely scuppered Trent. It was really difficult for him to play his first turn. There was a little bit of a lesson here, actually, is that the way that Trent positioned his mines was to prevent ingress into his deployment zone. So he was anticipating an assault on his deployment zone from outside. But because I just infiltrated past that, which you can do with for days relatively reliably, his mines never really did anything. I think I took 1 hit on an Asawira in the middle of that assault on the second turn. particularly against the threat of 2 or 3 for days, which Hassassins bring to bear, you can and probably should choose to pull your mines back and basically use them to defend your highest value assets. Basically, say if you are going to put an impersonator into me, you will take a mine when you reveal. So, for example, that position that I deployed the Fade in, he could have put a mine there. It would have, 1, prevented the Fade from ever getting into close combat with the Lieutenant, and 2, if I'd gone for a shotgun kill in the same way, turned it into a suicide pact. So that's a small change that Trent could have made. Either way, I'm 10 up on my first game. That's fantastic. And we're now going into acquisition in round 2. Hope you enjoyed this. There'll be more coming soon.